Texas, and they say it's terrible down there, no power.
Mm-hmm.
Serves anybody right for moving to Texas. So, we are finishing up our LeaderConnect series of Renew, and we've been talking about renewing ourselves this year, our own prayer life, asking God to do what only God can do, and asking him, according to Habakkuk, to do it again. So we've looked at several different elements of renewing things in our own heart, our prayer life, our church. And today we are looking at renewing the mission of the church and this whole idea of reproduction. So we have several guys on this call today. Bad news, good news. Bad news is Ivan Villalta got stuck in Florida and he won't be with us today. The good news is we'll have more time with Chris, Luke, and Daniel. I'm going to introduce the three of you, and then I'm going to throw out some questions, and we'll go from there. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me start with Chris Hall. Chris planted Catalyst Ventura. Has it been 12 years?
13.
13
2000
ago.
Yeah.
And since then, Chris has been coaching a lot of other church planters, done a great job there, did multi-site, planted some churches. We're going to talk about that. We also have Luke Allen, who is from Bossier, Louisiana, the Shreveport area. And I heard you talking a little bit, Luke, about how cold it is there.
Yes.
And do you have power? Did you get power finally?
Yeah, they're just doing rolling blackouts to conserve electricity. So if I cut out at some point, it's our turn. So like my neighbor to the left doesn't have it and hasn't had it all day.
Wow. Well, Luke not only planted the Covenant Church there, he's planted several churches out of there, a couple that are with Transformation Ministry, Stephen Partain over in New Orleans, and Weston Brown, who's just up the street in Shreveport. And then we've got the great Daniel Nunez, who is, are you in Tijuana or Rosarito or San Diego today, Daniel?
I'm in San Diego, in San Isidro, 2 miles from the border, so close to Tijuana City.
Okay. And Daniel has helped start about 41 churches of his vision of trying to do 50 there that's been expanded, and we'll talk about that. But let me do this. Let me start with this question. You guys all got involved in church planting. Now, not all of you started a church right away, but I know that you guys got involved in church planting. So what was it inside of yourselves? How did God kind of renew your mission to go out and plant? And I want to start with Chris. You were a youth pastor. What caused you to want to plant a church?
In our area, well, first of all, God had been doing a work in my wife and I. They always say, like, when we were really comfortable in youth ministry, didn't really want to leave, but we started to get uncomfortable where we were. And I think that was God making us uncomfortable. Like they say, when a young bird doesn't want to leave the nest, the mom starts taking out the feathers so that the nest gets prickly and the young one's going to want to leave the nest. That's kind of how it was for us. And as we started to figure out or search about what was next for us, we became really intrigued by church planting because we knew that church planting was one of the, if not the most effective way of reaching people far from God. And so we just started praying about that. Was that supposed to be our next calling? We knew it wasn't going to be in traditional like mission fields or nonprofits or anything like that. And we really wanted to be a part of starting something new. My wife and I are both entrepreneurial in our nature, and felt like starting a new church was going to be the way to reach the most people the quickest. And so we made the decision to step out in faith, become local missionaries, and start a church for people that don't like church.
Okay. Now, Luke, I know that church planting is a little bit in your blood. Talk about that, and then talk about what was the catalyst for you to go and do it yourself.
Yeah, my dad planted several churches, and that was the kind of lifestyle that I knew. I lived in 16 different houses in my first 18 years. So my dad was kind of a serial planter. We would move and start a church and raise up leadership, pass it on to someone else, and we would go do it again. And I knew I did not want to do that. That was terrible. I became a youth pastor. We started reaching kids that no one else would reach. And I remember bringing a kid in. He finally made it to church on a Sunday morning, and one of the deacons walked up to him. He had a hat on in the sanctuary and just ripped him a new one for wearing a hat in the sanctuary. I've been trying to get this kid to church for 6 months. He never came back, broke my heart. And I was like, man, somebody's got to do something to reach these kids and reach their parents on a church level. And so between that and I took a church planting seminary class as like the easy class. It was supposed to be one weekend conference I was supposed to go to. Bob Roberts was leading it. And as he kept talking, I was like, man, I feel like the Lord is telling me to go do this. So that combination is what led me to plant. And
you just celebrated which anniversary for your church?
10 years. We just made 10 years. Yes, sir.
The big 10.
Yeah.
Now, Daniel, I know that you were hoping to be the planter who was tapped on the shoulder to go plant. That didn't happen. Tell us what did happen.
For me, it was, I don't know, more natural, maybe in the way that whenever I saw an empty lot, I would tell my wife, look at my wife and say, that would be a great place for a church. And all of a sudden, when I started feeling that urgency to grow, and never thought about growing a mega church or a big church in my neighborhood, but I wanted to go out in different places. And that's how God gave me this vision to plant 50 churches in my lifetime. And so it's just, like I said, more natural in the sense that I wanted to see a church in every empty lot. And that's what I do now. I'm always looking for empty lots to go plant a new church in different communities.
But the church that was the base for what's happening in Tijuana, you were not the original church planter of that, right?
No, I was part of the team that started it, but then I was told not to go and stay at my church. And when that happened, I went to Bible college in San Diego, and did other things. And then they had to remove the pastor, and the pastor said, "Are you still interested in coming here?" So I went to El Nino, which was one of the poorest. It is still one of the poorest neighborhoods in Tijuana, in all of Mexico. But from there, God called us to go out and be a blessing in many places. So when I took it over, when I took over the church, the other pastor was removed. Basically replanted, because there were 3 couples that were left. And from there, 41 churches have come out.
Wow. Daniel, talk a little bit about how you got the vision to do 50.
I was in a men's conference, and when the pastor was preaching, he said, write down on a piece of paper something that you would like to accomplish or do in your life, but you will need help, God's help for that. You can do it on your own. And I said, well, plant 50 churches in my lifetime. So I wrote down on the piece of paper, put it in the offering basket, and we prayed over it. And 3 or 4 months later, we were planting the first one, and 3 churches every year since then.
Wow, that's cool. Hey, and that's what I want to talk about next. We're talking about this whole renew piece about God working in our hearts and our lives. There's a lot of pastors out there, and you guys planted and were pastoring. What made you plant that first church out of your church? Most churches never get to that. Somewhere between 94 and 96% of churches never reproduce. So what was it that caused you to say, okay, we're going to further the mission by planting a church? Chris, why don't you go first on that?
It's a great question. I think it's, like you said, JD, it's an important question that I think churches need to ask themselves is why not, right? Is what are the hurdles that are keeping churches from doing that? Obviously, we had the benefit of it was actually a TM church that I was working at before. When I came to them and said, we believe God's given us a vision to plant a church for people that don't go to church, actually in the same city that church was in, they said yes. And they said, what can we do to help you? We realize that you're going to be able to do something that we can't do. They were not in a position to make the changes they wanted to make at that time in order to reach a new generation. And so I had the luxury of having a group of elders and staff that said, we believe in you, and we're going to take one of our longest tenured staff members of this church, and we're going to send them, and you can have as much money and as many people as you want, because that's what we believe in. And so like I had this wonderful and beautiful like experience of an open-handed church and they didn't have to be, and they probably shouldn't have been. They were going through a very tough season in the life cycle of that church, but they were still open-handed with that. And so like they let me use their offices, they let me use their copiers, back when we used copiers, those types of things. And so they were very open-handed. So, that combined with the vision that God had given my wife and I, that we wanted to be a church planting church. We didn't want the kingdom work and church planting to end. We wanted our branch to be able to sprout new branches. So that was part of our example. It was also then part of our passion and desire.
Before you keep going, can you shout out to that's a Transformation Ministries church. Let's give them a little shout out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, back then it was First Baptist Church of Ventura. It's now Coastline Bible Church. And Pastor Neil in there is a very, very close friend of mine. Love that guy to death. And we do a lot of stuff partnering together as friends and TM churches that are in neighboring towns now. But so yeah, their leadership was super open-handed. So our story is kind of two-folded with multiplication. It started for us when we had written our church planting prospectus, and we believed that we wanted to be a multiplying church, and that one of those first places that we were going to hopefully plant out of our plant was in Santa Paula, which was about 20 minutes east of Ventura. That had always been on our radar. We kind of felt like there needed to be a new church in that town. And so about 3 years into our church plant, we had a bunch of people coming from Santa Paula, from that area. And we thought, well, maybe this is the opportunity. There looks to be the beginnings of a core team of high-level leaders and some people. So we began to pray, okay, God, are you going to call our church to give birth to another church or at a campus? And we just said, we're going to go for it. So 3 years in our church plant, we launched a second campus about 20 minutes east of where our original campus was, and started the work of trying to reach a new people group in a new town. So we went with that campus model there. But at the same time, when we went campus model, I was a assessor at the Discovery Center, and there was a guy in Ventura who went also to that Discovery Center who wanted to plant a church in Ventura. And so I had told him, I said, you need to go to this Discovery Center, find out if this is God's next call for you. Him and his wife paid for their own way to go to the Discovery Center. And in that, they got this kind of a conditional recommend, but the condition was that they needed to go and be a part of a church plant, have a healthy kind of recovery season before they went to plant a church. So we said, yes, like we'll take you in as a church planting resident. I mean, and this guy, you guys know Matt. I mean, Matt is a high level leader. He's kind of a unicorn. He's gifted in just about everything. And so we brought him on as a church planting resident, knowing that we were going to send him out and help him plant a church in the same town. So it was like, we were getting to do what Coastline did for us, and I feel like they showed how to do it right. And I said, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And so we wound up bringing Matt on part-time staff. He led worship for us for 3 years. He wound up not planting in Ventura. And then it was a whole nother process of getting him up to the Sacramento area, which I can tell that story at another time. But really for us, it was this idea of, if God's called us as a church to be a multiplying church, what does open-handedness look for us? God gave us resources. He gave us people. He even gave us a church planting, someone who wanted to be a church planter. And so rather than us saying, no, we want to keep all this to ourselves, we said, hey, what can we do to help multiply the kingdom by sending people out as much as we were trying to keep them in. And we did that from our leadership, even to some of our best leaders throughout the years during that time.
Just really inspiring to see how God has used that, Chris, and your example for other people, and just encouraging them to multiply. Luke, I want to go to you because you have planted several churches out of. Talk about the first one where you said, "Hey, it's time for us to branch out."
Our first plant. I think when we planted, we always just knew we wanted to be a multiplying church and be part of a cataclysmic movement. I read something Keller said about the greatest evangelism strategy in the world today is new church plants. And I was like, well, that sounds awesome. Let's get on board with that. And God sent us. I met a church planter in a coffee shop, and he was kicking the tires on it. Wasn't happy at his, felt unrestful at his current church. Thought maybe church planting would be for him. And so we joined up with him. He brought him to the Discovery Center, Caleb Tarr, and helped him plant. So that was our first one. We did that in year 3. And then the others just kind of followed after that.
Okay. Daniel, talk about your first plant out of El Nino.
Our first one was, we had a team that was building a house in our community, in the community of Rojo Gomez. And I went there, and I was with a team from Sandals Church in Riverside. But I was just going with them to where Turi and his friends were leading worship at an open air service where they were built like an outreach kind of thing. And when I was going by Rojo Gomez, I looked to the left and I said, we want to plant a church. I want to plant a church in that lot right there. So I just pointed, and the guy turned around, made a U-turn, and went, and we prayed over the lot. And from there, and a lot of people, like a big white van in Mexico. So maybe there were some toys or something. So a lot of people gathered. By the time we finished, there was like 100 people already there. And I just told them, we're going to build a church here in this area. So everybody looked around and said, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? And then a couple weeks later, there were like 5 lots where that was happening. And one of the lots became available. And 2 weeks later, there was a for sale sign. Called the lady, gave her a down payment. And 2 months after that, we were building the first church, the Rojo Gomez Church. But later on, Mariners partnered with us, and we bought the other 4 lots. And now the 4 lots is the big church, like room for about 300 people.
If you've ever driven in Tijuana with Daniel, doesn't matter where you're going, you're going to stop at some point and see a lot of land, and he's going to say, hey, let's get out and pray for this lot of land. I think God wants a church here. Yeah. Where did you get the down payment money? Did you just have it in your back pocket or what?
No, actually, I called one of my friends that had come before, and I told him that I needed $1,000 for the down payment, and he sent me a check just like that. And so just God gave me that favor, and I was able to raise the down payment. We paid $150 for the next 4 or 5 years. But then when the other teams came down, and Pastor Kenton came down with his leadership team, and they made a commitment to raise the money to build the big church. That was about a $300,000 project.
Wow. Hey, I also want to say, if you're ever driving with Daniel anywhere, at some point he's going to say, I need $1,000 for this next project. Don't get your hand on your wallet. The money's going to come out. Hey, I want to ask you, let's do this right. I want to ask about, okay, a lot of churches think, oh boy, multiplication means I got to give 50 people and $50,000 and all this time and energy into this other church, and it's just going to be too much for us. Talk a little bit about what you really need to do to get involved in reproduction. Does it have to be 50-50 and a time drain?
Mhm.
Daniel probably can answer this better than any of us.
Okay. Well, in Mexico is different because you raise $24,000, you can build a church in a week. So it's a matter of having all the elements in place. But there's people that have given us $10. There's people that have given us $10,000 or even more than that. But I think the key for inviting people to this is that it's gonna be something for God. It's God's kingdom that you're extending. It's not, for ourselves, for me as a pastor, for my family. It is for God. So if you are clear in what you're trying to do, and then it became, I mean, when I asked for the first one, of course it was not a lot, not a lot of people believed in this, but now that we're 41, I mean, we have people from Ohio, we have people from Texas, people from everywhere telling us that they want to contribute, that they want to build and pay for number 50. So we have number 50 paid, but we still have 9 more to go.
Chris,
It's just appealing to them, I guess.
well, there's one of the great factors in multiplication is if you do it and it works great, then that just builds momentum.
Yeah.
In a moment, I want to talk about what happens when it doesn't work great. But Chris or Luke, do you want to mention, what's involved? Does it have to be, donating your liver and kidney and eye and all that?
I'll jump in with, we've planted 4 churches out of our church, and all 4 were much different. I think the greatest contribution that we gave was a decision that we made that we were going to lead with an open hand, and the people and leaders that God entrusted to us, that he was welcome, like he did in Acts 13, to call them to go somewhere else. And we would bless whatever that is, if that was literally right next door to us, or if it was 6 hours away, or if it was, somewhere in a foreign country. So that was the first decision. And we just started praying without any money or anything else involved. And God just kept bringing us those leaders. And I saw that question in the Q&A to Daniel about identifying and multiplying leaders. I think that's what it was to us. God just kept bringing them to us. I would meet him at a coffee shop, start talking about, asking that question that Daniel brought up a minute ago, like, what would you want to accomplish in your life? And they'd be like, man, I really feel this stirring to plant a church. And I'm like, well, our church would be a safe landing spot if you wanted to come jump in. And they would come and do life with us for a little bit. And then from there, we figured out the money thing. But I think most of it was like, hey, we're going to be a safe landing spot for you to come heal, to come learn, to come whatever, to come grow. And then we'll support you wherever God leads.
Yeah. To answer your question, JD, I get 3 things. My encouragement to churches that no, you don't have to give your liver. If God calls you to give your liver, then you definitely should give your liver. But if you're a leader that wants to start a multiplication movement or be involved in church planting in some way, I would just encourage you to do something small right away. My guess is there's probably a young church that has needs in and around your community that needs something. And so do something small and do something easy. That will start to kind of stretch the generosity and your vision towards multiplication if you're doing something for another church plant. And I think it takes a special, it's harder to do it when it's in your hometown for a lot of established churches. So my encouragement would be, in your town, is there a new church plant? Get to know that pastor, find out what their needs are, and do something. Whether it's, hey, they need a sound system, or they need, a little bit of cash to pay rent that month, or they need worship leaders on the weekends. Like think about what that looks like. But I think for a lot of churches, they have to redefine what missions is, and they have to redefine what generosity is, because every church, especially in TM, we have a missions budget within our church. We have missionaries that we support all over the world. In many cases, we have missionaries the church has been supporting for 20 years. There's not a real relationship with that person anymore. They're just on the books. But we often don't think of church planting in the local context as part of missions. And so my encouragement would be to think of local church planting, or church planting in general, and say, how can we include church planting into our missions budget? And think of it in that way, but also thinking about what generosity looks like as well. Is what are those small things that you can begin to flex those generosity muscles towards local church plants? I think maybe a little bit of a paradigm shift for pastors, missions boards, elder teams to think a little through a different lens when it comes to multiplication, and even the smallest little act can kind of whet that appetite a little bit to want to do more in time.
Let me just pause a second. I want to talk a little bit about the stages of reproduction. When you think about a church and their stages, a lot of churches are just way over on one side, and they are anti-reproduction, whether they've actually stated that or not, but they're on birth control, and they are not looking at all to plan. And we need to move off of that. If you're a church that's on birth control, I would just encourage you, like as Chris said, hey, rethink your theology. And then there's some who are starting to be open to it. And then there's this whole group of churches that are at a maybe later stage. Yeah, I'll do something later. We'll do when we're large enough, when we're big enough. And maybe we'll get to this question or not, but often it's not the mega churches that are doing church planting. I think the churches that are turning the world upside down right now are the middle-sized churches. Smaller churches, I know it's tough but you don't have to wait. So there's this maybe later, and then there's this next stage of just do something, write a check, as Chris said. Just find somebody, go down to Starbucks, look for the church planter, do something. And here's the good news: if you're part of TM, you are doing something. If you give it to TM, part of our mission is planting. But you can give more to that. You can do more, and then there's, I think, the next stage before being a mother church. The next stage is really being an aunt or an uncle stage. When my wife and I planted our second church in the Bay Area, I spoke at a bunch of different churches around the Bay Area, and the line we used was, "We don't have a mother church, but we're looking for all the aunts and uncles we can get." And people would just kick in, like an uncle would just say, "Hey, here's some money." And I plant pastors all the time. We would show up, they would just put a check in your hand or cash in your hand, as your favorite uncle would do. And then there's maybe the next stage, the rich uncle you go to. And then there's the parent, and that first time parent, where you're doing, and then there's the next stage is just regular parenting, and then getting to this last stage where you're a baby making machine. My son Tim, they're on their 8th child right now. They know how to do reproduction, and that's where Daniel is, and Chris and Luke are approaching that. So I just want to encourage you, take that next step. If you're a mother church, maybe you ought to think about, well, we should be having multiple kids here. We need to have twins. So, hey, I had mentioned sometimes it doesn't go great. And one of the reasons why I asked the three of you is you've all had wonderful experience in seeing churches go good, but you've also had somewhere maybe there was some fits and stops. So talk about what you do when reproduction doesn't go as smoothly as they say it might in all the books and webinars.
Wow. Well, I can start. I have a lot of experience on that. That's we just got to keep going. We had problems with one of the lots at the church. What the process that we do in Mexico, at least in Tijuana area, we buy the property and we make a down payment on the property, and then we make payments every month for 5 or 6 years, something like that. So in one of the places we built this church, and we got this church in Orange County that came down and built it, and we were all nice and everything was fine. But then we tried the the people that sold us the property, he got killed. So we didn't know who to pay. And for a year and a half, they were fighting for the property, the ex-wife with the new wife, and all big mess. At the end of the day, we ended up tearing down the church, just tearing down the whole thing. So what we did is we put it together again. We took it apart. We put it on a truck and took it to Mexicali, and we ended up rebuilding it in Mexicali. So just gotta keep going and thinking, this. I don't know what else to say other than just take it down and build it somewhere else. And we have the capability of doing that. There's some stuff, some drywall that we couldn't save. There was some roofing material that we couldn't save, but most of the church, a couple $1,000 more, and we were able to put it back together in Mexicali. So that's one of the challenges that we've had, as far as that. That doesn't happen that often, but there's challenges where pastors fall, where blow up, when there's challenges when pastors quit on us. And I found myself pastoring 3 churches. I was in El Niño from 11 to 1. I was in Rojo Gomez from 3 to 5, or 2 to 4, and then I was at the other church when the pastor passed away, and I was pastoring 3 churches in one day, going around, and that didn't last for too long, and I wasn't going to last, but at the end, right now I'm not pastoring any, so it just balances out, to just keep going, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Luke and Chris, have you guys had to tear down any buildings, move them to Mexicali?
No, we haven't had to tear down anything. Every one of our church plants has been different, and they've all been difficult. None of ours have gone as smooth as I would hope them to. The first church we planted in Monroe, which is about 90 miles from us, it didn't make it. The guy decided his real ministry spot was back in the military, and so we dismantled that thing after putting a lot of work into it. The hardest one was the one we planted most recently, close to us in the city next door, 10 miles away probably. We sent 50 of our best people over there. As a small church, we were running 200. So we sent 25% of our people to go start this new one. And it just gutted our church. But I really, God gave me a word on that he was going to bring back more than we had sent out. And he did. We were running, 100 more probably within six months. But that's just, it still was really difficult. The church thought I'd lost my mind to send some of our very best people over there to do that. I read this, Stetzer put out this, he surveyed 100 pastors, and no matter what size church, whether 100 people, 400 people, or 1,000 people, every pastor said that they would be ready to plant a church when they were 25% larger than they currently were. So no one was ready to plant. Even the person running 1,000 said, if we just had 1,250, then we would go plant. And so that was kind of the catalyst for me saying, okay, man, we just got to do it. But it was really difficult, and I would change a lot of things.
For us, we had the church that we helped plant up in Woodland, up in the Sacramento area, has been nothing but a blessing on every single level. I mean, it was a great situation. But our camp, when we went to multi-site and planted a second campus, that became a very difficult season for us. Looking back on it, it wasn't that we were not big enough. It wasn't that we were. The real issue, I don't think we were mature enough. I felt like we were a 13-year-old having a baby, and we just weren't. We had this passion, we had this drive within us, and it stretched us really thin. In the time, it was a very painful process because we wound up closing one of the campuses. In fact, we wound up closing the Ventura campus that we started off with, and we wound up moving everything to the second campus where God was producing all the fruit. We saw it as a pruning, and going into the mission field that we really still sense that God was really calling us into as a church family. So it was painful, but when you look back at God's hand of providence and his hand of provision over that stretch of time in the life of our church, it helped create who we are today. And, if you ask most of us, if we had to go and do it over, we probably would have done some things differently, but we definitely would have not done it. We would have done it, again, because we see now what God had done with it. But I think when it comes to this thing, JD, too, like we as pastors make the same excuses that we do when we're young married couples, right? We need more money, we need more time together, and we're just not ready to have kids. But the reality is that when God wants you to have kids, God starts to give you kids. And a lot of us don't say, well, I don't want to have any kids because I'm afraid one of them might be difficult or it's going to cost us money. We do it because we have a love for our family and we want to create. And so I think that same mentality serves us well in the church as well.
I'm encouraged that you guys kept going in the midst of difficulty. Sometimes we hype church planting, and we have 100% success rate goal, and we're running well into the 90s. But not everyone works out perfectly. And in Acts 18, it's kind of interesting because the Apostle Paul had a failed church plant. It says he spent all of his time pouring into this, and nothing happened. And finally, he had to shake his the dust off his feet. But he went down the street and planted again. And thank you guys for doing that, for continuing the ministry. One of the questions that came up is obviously, okay, you want to plant churches, and all of you have kind of sent people kind of from your own church. How do you find these leaders? How do you find the potential church planters? Okay, great.
For me, it is just looking for. I mean, in Mexico, you have no salary, pastor. You work, you have your regular job, your 40-hour job or 48-hour a week job, because we work 48 hours in Mexico. So you work 48 hours a week, and then maybe some overtime here and there. And then you have you're a pastor on the weekends and on the evenings. So it's like, first of all, I find the guys that are serving in the church, not expecting anything, just because they love God and they love serving in the church. And that's my first point. And then now we thank God for the discovery centers, which we didn't have before. And I just figured, hey, this guy is so faithful, I'm gonna send him as a pastor. But now it's different. We do all the process, and I have a team that's helping me do that. So that is great. But for me, in our context in Mexico, it's got to be something that he's going to be doing it for free. So they should be already doing something for free, which is just serving voluntarily at the church, preaching, serving, and just being there all the time. And I mean, that's my experience, because when I went into be a pastor, I had my full-time job in San Diego, and I was going back to Tijuana, crossing the border to go and preach, and then coming back and all that. And that my experience, and that's how every pastor gets to be especially in Mexico. It's so different because we have pastors that start on their own, whether it's because of a church split or because they didn't believe in them or whatever it was. They started on their own, but really cursed by their leadership. And I think one of the differences that we make as a ministry is that when the pastors go out, they are sent and they're supported. And that's not what you usually see when you start a church. When you plant a church in Mexico, it's because you have had a follow with your pastor, and that's the only way you start a church. And for us to believe in them and support them and pray for them and care for them, it's just there's a lot of people that want to come and join our association of churches because that they see that, and I'm trying to be careful. I want to plant new churches. I don't want other churches or leave their ministries and come to us. I don't want that. I'm very hard on them, but if they insist, I have to let them in, because that's what God told me to do.
I know it sounds cliche, and JD, you've throughout the years have challenged us as church planters and leaders to do a couple of things. One is just to pray that God would open your eyes to see who the potential church planters are within your community. I think we don't see them because we're not looking for them and we're not praying for them. And so I think from my perspective, it goes there. But my guess is that you probably have pastors and leaders that are on your staff and your leadership team right now who have the skill set and the passion and the drive and the giftedness to be a church planter. And my encouragement to you would be to have those conversations with them and just say, hey, I see this in you. Have you ever thought about it? Because we all know, we've been in ministry long enough to realize that no one stays forever, right? Your staff are going to move on in one way, shape, or form at some point. Very seldom do we run the long game with every single staff member. So it's kind of like, do we want to lose them or do we want to send them? And there may be some on your staff that you have the opportunity to send into church planting. Because if you don't provide that opportunity for them to church plant, they'll leave. And so praying for, identifying, having those conversations and being willing to say, hey, we're going to choose to send before we lose.
Anything you want to add, Luke?
I think the only thing I would add, I think the praying thing's a huge piece. I think, you look for people, and this is a couple of our guys we found this way. They were on our staff, but they were just kind of restless, and they always wanted to start new work. They were never happy where they were. And, that's certainly the case we have with Stephen. He bounced around every different kind of ministry in our church, and he didn't really fit all of them. Stephen Partain,
New Orleans, yeah.
And he didn't really fit any of them, really. But I was joking with him, like he couldn't even make the coffee right. Anything we put him in, he was just kind of. But he loved the Lord and he loved people, and so we just pulled the trigger and sent him to New Orleans, and he has flourished. So part of it is just having that, open-mindedness that God might be sending people on your very own staff or within your own body.
It's opening our eyes. We get so myopic. I think of Acts 6, church was doing really well, but there's a problem and they just needed to expand a little bit. And they finally opened their eyes, and Stephen and Philip, what incredible studs, but they were just kind of buried in the church until there was a problem. So if there's a problem, if there's some, maybe you're actually pregnant. But I would just encourage you. I know the apostolic people kind of tend to do this. Encouragement people tend to do this. There's probably somebody around you right now who you could send out or prepare to send out. They're all around us. A lot of it is just having that little mindset to think through that. One of the questions that came in, Daniel, you talked about having a fallout with pastors and church splits in Mexico. Believe it or not, that happens in other countries as well.
Wow.
Even the United States. The question was, that doesn't sound like a great church planting plan. Is that the best plan, or what do you guys think?
Oh, no, I think the best way to do it is just send them. I mean, Chris said it right. I had a pastor that kept in our network, and he keeps telling me every year he calls me and says, this leader left, this other leader left, and I told him, when are you gonna change the story? When are you gonna call me and tell me I sent someone? I'm gonna send them to the Discovery Center, and I'm going to send them somewhere to plant a church. But his story has always been they left, and it makes me mad, because now they're pastors somewhere else. When they're not being supported, they don't come to me, because they think if they had a fallout with this pastor and belongs to our network, that means he's not gonna come and ask me for help. So it's very difficult situation. It's a very difficult situation when I can't reach over to them, because then I don't want to overstep the boundaries of the other pastor that had this misunderstanding with him or whatever. So my hands are tied, and I say, if they didn't send them, I'm not gonna go around them and send them, because it's like just not good. It doesn't look right. So we lose those guys, and later on in life, we see them pastoring somewhere else, starting from scratch, not being supported or anything like that, and it just breaks my heart. But I don't want to have problems with one of my pastors, So that's difficult, and I wish I had more courage and go around them and do it, because they need the help. They need the support. We just came back from Florida, where all these pastors, that went through the Discovery Center, and they just needed someone to be with them. They need somebody on their corner. They need somebody to speak to them and care for them. And they just don't have it. They just don't have it. Hopefully, everyone that was there is going to stay connected. That's what I told them, at the exit interview. And I told them, we're not going to leave you orphans here. We're going to be with you. And here's our phone number. Here's our email, our Facebook information, whatever. And we are going to be with you. So the best way to do it is not by a church split. The best way is to send them. And especially in our network, we are a network that believes in sending. And if they think, I think the biggest challenge is the pastor. The bottleneck is the pastor that still thinks it's his church and his people, and it needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that is a great plug for what we're doing at Transformation Ministries. We don't want to leave people as orphans. Years ago, I asked my church planting coach, the great Bob Logan, what's the best way to plant a church? Is, maybe it's not a split. Is it sending people out? Is it a, parachute drop? What's the best way? And his answer was, any way you can do it. So here's the thing: if there's a split, if there's a fallout with a pastor, that might not be the best way, but there's also opportunities to go and apologize and get on the same page and talk to that pastor or that staff person and say, maybe God's got something better in store here. And if your church started as a split, you can always ask forgiveness for that and go back, get on your knees and have a prayer service, say, hey, let's start this thing fresh. So I just love that answer. Any way you can have it. Mothers like to talk about how their baby was birthed. The rest of us, we don't really like to talk about it, and it doesn't matter all that much as long as you're there. Hey, what I want to do is we're getting up on time here. I want to give each of you 2 minutes just to say whatever you want to say to us about God renewing the mission in your church, and if reproduction is a part of that, great. But just I want to give each of you 2 minutes for a final word. Who wants to go first?
I will. Okay, go.
This is real personal. This is real personal. But I think before we can think about renewal in our church, we have to really come to grips with what is God wanting to renew in me. Coming out of this last year, this has been like some of the hardest ministry year ever. I have not talked to a single pastor who is feeling like they're swimming strongly right now. They're either just barely keeping their heads afloat or they're swimming upstream. They don't know what church they're coming back to. It's difficult. There's financial struggles, you're having staffing issues and whatnot. And I think for me, I have to continually ask God, like, God, what are you wanting to renew in my heart, so that in creating margin within my own life, for me to be able to redream what our church is going to do and the vision that we're going to have is for the future. I can't speak for everyone in this panel, but this last year I've found myself doing far more work in the things that I'm not good at instead of working within my sweet spots. And I'm now just feeling like I'm coming out of that going, I have to create space and margin in my own life as the leader for God to speak to me, so that I know what the next thing is for us as a church. And so when it comes to renewal, I just feel like, renewal is not something we can manufacture out of our giftedness. It has to be produced out of who we are and what God's doing within us. And so I know for me right now, like that's the question that I'm asking myself is what does renewal look like in my life as a follower, but also as the pastor of this church? And then how can I lead out of that?
Okay, so if I can go next, I think I have some bad news. And the bad news is that whether you like to plant churches or not, you have to plant a new church. And you have to treat your church as a new church plant. You maybe, it's not a matter of, I had a meeting with my pastors a couple of weeks ago, and that's what I told them. You're thinking, what do you have when you started? You had zero, and you started planting your church with 0 people, and I told them, right now you have access to only 25% of the capacity for the church, but you have 25%. You can look at the 75% that is not here or that is not able to come because they don't let them. Or the government won't allow it, or you can be thankful for the 25%. And so renewal for me, it'll come in the form of we're gonna this is what we have. We can be crying, we can be complaining that there's this 25% only that came back, or we can be saying this is what we have and we are going to start and go from here and start getting out. I mean, whatever we did when we started with no experience 5, 10, 16 years ago, whatever it was, now you have to start thinking, okay, this is a new church plant and we're going to go out and we're going to advertise, we're going to invite people, we're going to do everything, evangelize and all that stuff that we probably were not doing because we were full or we had a big church. Now we don't. And just renew your mind on thinking, okay, we got to start from scratch. We got 25%. Let's go for it.
Yeah, it's great, Daniel. I would add just to what these other guys have said, which were both spot on. One, JD, you talk so much about Acts 13. When you see the renewal coming in their church, they were praying and fasting intentionally. It looked like it was something they did pretty regularly. And so we've done that twice a year. We put a real focus on what every individual's missionary calling is. And we just talk about that. I'm under the conviction that every person in our church has a missionary calling. God is sending them to somewhere. It's either to their neighborhood, it's to their workplaces. He's sending them somewhere with the gospel. And we work to try to help equip them to understand their missionary calling. And that's kind of baby steps into church planting for us, for every one of our guys. They started a small group. They started some kind of ministry of mission, and that led into something else. And then we just kind of keep that intentionally. We specifically pray for that at Christmas time and the month of July. We have prayer prompts that follow along. All right, what's God calling us to? How can we support and equip? And as long as we keep that kind of in front of everybody, God has always spoken and raised up the right people to send out.
Well, thank you 3 for being such great leaders in this. You've gone, without any prompting, you've gone to God and had him say, hey, I want you to step out and reproduce. And you guys have done that, and you've consistently done that. And you've pushed through, whether it was going great or whether it was not. See this little note here. It begins with personal renewal, and churches have to make sure their people have that missionary mindset and reproduce. But so thank you guys so much for that. Thank you all who are on this call for your contribution and your partnership in Transformation Ministries. We're reproducing, we're starting churches. We're your aid to help you do that. We're part of your mission to help you reproduce. And because you've been giving, and if you haven't been giving, I want to encourage you to get back to that. But because of your giving and your partnership, we've seen a lot of churches start in places like Southern California, but also Mexico and even Louisiana and Texas and all over the United States. So thank you so much. Next week with our LeaderConnect, we're doing a little bit of a pivot. Tomorrow is Ash Wednesday. Today's Fat Tuesday. Tomorrow's Ash Wednesday, and that means Easter is 6 weeks away. So what are we doing for Easter? How are we going to do Easter this year? Will we be open? Will we be closed? What's happening? We're going to do 2 to 3 weeks and LeaderConnect, just talking about Easter, talking about prepping for it, talking about, hey, how do we handle Easter in 2021? So you want to be here. That's next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific. Thank you all for your partnership with Transformation Ministries. Thanks to you three. And we will see you next week, next Tuesday. God bless.
Thanks. Blessings, guys.